We'll get started. Brendan, Karina, Zara, all good to see you. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Lance.
Hello, thank you.
Okay, good.
Thank you, Lance.
Okay, you're welcome. All right, so we'll begin with the altruistic motivation. So if everybody has their prayer book and ready to go. All mother sentient beings, especially those enemies who hate me, obstructors who harm me, and those who create obstacles on my path to liberation and omniscience. May they experience happiness, be separated from suffering, and swiftly I will establish them in the state of unsurpassed, perfect, complete, and precious Buddhahood. All mother sentient beings, especially those enemies who hate me, obstructors who harm me, and those who create obstacles on my path to liberation and omniscience. May they experience happiness, be separated from suffering, and swiftly I will establish them in the state of unsurpassed, perfect, complete, and precious Buddhahood. Dagla dang war je pe dra no pa je pe ge. Pa dang tam she ken pe bar du jo par je pa tam she ki so je pe. Manam kadam yam pe sem chen tam she de wa dang den. Dog now dang drel nor du la na me pa yang dag pa zog pe shang ju brin po she to pa ja. Thus, until I achieve enlightenment, I perform virtuous deeds with body, speech, and mind. Until death, I perform virtuous deeds with body, speech, and mind. From this time until tomorrow, I perform virtuous deeds with body, speech, and mind. Te she du sang ma ge gi ba du lu na gi sam ge wa la ko. Ma she ba du lu na gi sam ge wa la ko. Du de ring ne song te ni ma sang ta sam gi ba du lu na gi sam ge wa la ko. We take refuge in the kind root and lineage lamas. We take refuge in the deities of the mandalas of the yidams. We take refuge in all the exalted Buddhas. We take refuge in the perfect Dharma. We take refuge in the excellent order of the Sanghas. We take refuge in all the noble Dakas, Dakinis, and Dharma guardians, possessors of the eye of wisdom. We take refuge in the kind root and lineage lamas. We take refuge in the deities of the mandalas of the yidams. We take refuge in all the exalted Buddhas. We take refuge in the perfect Dharma. We take refuge in the excellent order of the Sanghas. We take refuge in all the noble Dakas, Dakinis, and Dharma guardians, possessors of the eye of wisdom. Transcends awa dangur pa je pe pal dan la ma dam pa nam la kap su chi o. Yidam kil gorgi la sok nam la kap su chi o. Sangye chom den de nam la kap su chi o. Tam pe cho nam la kap su chi o. Pa pe ge du nam la kap su chi o. Pa wo ka dro cho kyung song wei song yes she gi chang dang dem pa nam la kap su chi o. Until I attain the heart of enlightenment, I take refuge in all the Buddhas. I take refuge in the Dharma, and likewise in the assembly of the Bodhisattvas. As the previous Buddhas embraced the enlightened mind and progressed on the Bodhisattva's path, I too, for the benefit of all sentient beings, give birth to bodhicitta, and apply myself to accomplish the stages of the path. Until I attain the heart of enlightenment, I take refuge in all the Buddhas. I take refuge in the Dharma, and likewise in the assembly of the Bodhisattvas. As the previous Buddhas embraced the enlightened mind and progressed on the Bodhisattva's path, I too, for the benefit of all sentient beings, give birth to bodhicitta and apply myself to accomplish the stages of the path. Shangshu Ningpo Chiki Bar Sangye Namla Kapsu Chi Chodang Shangshub Sampayi Soklang Deshin Kapsu Chi Jeta Nongi Deshegi Shangshub Tugni Ke Padang Shangshub Sampe La Pala De Dagrim Shin E Patar De Shindro La Pendandu Shangshub Samni Ke Gishin De Shindu Ni La Pala Rimpa Shindu La Pajio. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha most excellent, I take refuge until enlightenment is reached. By the merit of generosity and other good deeds, may I attain Buddhahood for the sake of all sentient beings. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha most excellent, I take refuge until enlightenment is reached. By the merit of generosity and other good deeds, may I attain Buddhahood for the sake of all sentient beings. Sangye Chodang Soki Chodamla Shangshu Bardu Dagni Kapsuchi Dagi Jin Soki Pe Sonamgi Drola Penshir Sangye Jupasho. May all mother sentient beings, boundless as the sky, have happiness and the causes of happiness. May they be liberated from suffering and the causes of suffering. May they never be separated from the happiness that is free from sorrow. May they rest in equanimity, free from attachment and aversion. May all mother sentient beings, boundless as the sky, have happiness and the causes of happiness. May they be liberated from suffering and the causes of suffering. May they never be separated from the happiness that is free from sorrow. May they rest in equanimity, free from attachment and aversion. Manam kadam yam pesam chentam she dewadang dewe gurdang dempar jorchi. Dugnal dang dunal gi gudang dwelwar jorchi. Dugnal me pe dewadang midra war jorchi. May ring chak dang ni dang dwelwe tang namla ne pa jorchi. Now if you can go to page 12, please, so we can recite the Sagari Mati requested sutra in English only. Likewise be extinguished. Extinguish all enemies to my purpose. Whatever evil forces are in me, be defeated. Do this so that when I am victorious, all pure radiance melts into me, completely purified. Take all this knowledge, food, and drink peacefully. Enjoy it and be satisfied so that all obstacles may be destroyed. Be liberated from all obstacles, all general obstacles. Maras are defeated by this gesture of the Buddha. By reciting this mantra, may all the Maras be purified. As a result, may all the Maras be defeated. Thank you very much for everybody for coming. So tonight we're going to talk about the life story of the Buddha, a brief stage by stage recitation of his life. If anybody has any questions now or any concerns about anything that we've done to this point or anything that's on your mind, now would be a good time to talk about it. Okay. If some of you have a copy of this, the Jewel Ornamental Liberation Outline. So I just want to draw your attention to the first page of this outline are the 12 principal deeds of the Buddha. So this is what we are reciting from, more or less. These are the 12 deeds of the Buddha. So we're going to talk about them more in a conversational way, but I just want to point that out that you have a reference to go to remind yourself of these different points. So the Buddha, his birth name was Siddhartha Gautama. He was born to a king and his queen. And his queen, the queen, his mother, had a dream that she was going to give birth to a very special being who is going to be a great leader of people. So this dream was in the form of a white elephant that had 6 tusks. So if you can imagine that, this was her dream. Some of this, is legend and so on. So we have to understand that this was 2,600 years ago, but everything has a connection. So we take it for what it is. But she had this premonition, she had this dream that she was going to give birth to a very special child. At this point, she still was not pregnant, but soon afterwards, she did become pregnant. And everybody in the royal family was joyous, happy that they were going to have a child. And it was wonderful. And during the time that she was pregnant, when it came time, close to the time for her to give birth to the baby, it was customary for the woman to travel to wherever her family was to give birth so that her family could help her to give birth. So she being the queen, she had a long entourage, a long procession of attendants and so on, who were with her as they were making their way from the palace of the king down to where the village was, where the queen came from. So along the way, she started having, severe, pains that she was going to have the baby. So another thing that was common during that time was that a woman would go to a tree, and in particular a sal tree, S-A-L, which is a rather small tree that has branches that are easily reached up by someone and hold on to the branches. And it was common for the woman to hold on to the branches and kind of crouch down a little bit and give birth to the baby, give birth to the infant. So attendants would take silks and so on and would cover the area so they could have some privacy and so on. And so this was the custom that the queen was following, to do that. But she was having a very difficult time of having this child. So they were in the village of Lumbini at this time. And this was, at the time, this was northern India. Now this village is part of Nepal. So Nepal hadn't been declared a sovereign nation at this time. It was all northern India. So there was this big pond that was nearby, and it was right outside of this pond that she was holding on to the tree and trying to give birth to the baby. However, there was a problem. She wasn't giving birth. The baby wasn't coming. So this is part of the legend. This is part of the story that someone, obviously one of her trusted attendants, used some kind of a knife or whatever and pierced her upper rib cage somewhere like here underneath her arm, like this, or right side, and made an incision. And the baby was born from that incision. So whether this was like what we call a cesarean section today, um, we can only, theorize that that's what maybe happened and so on. But nevertheless, the baby was born, and the baby was very aware and was very awake and was able to stand on his own at the very moment he was born. And they stood the baby right there where the mother was, where the attendants were, where this tree was. And the baby took 7 steps. And with each one of the steps, each one of his footfalls, beautiful flowers would just pop up out of the ground. So 7 steps, and there were 7 groups of flowers with each one of those. And as he did that, he raised his right hand and he declared that that this was going to be his last birth, and this was going to be a great birth, and that he was going to bring peace and happiness and awareness, awakeness to all beings who would want to have that awakening, who would want to have that enlightenment. So this was his declaration. This was something very special, of course. So then at the end of his 7th step, then he, became a normal newborn infant, and he was taken care of by the attendants immediately and so on. And the queen, Maya Devi was her name, Maya Devi, she took a bath in that nearby pond that was right there. And she took a bath, and I presume, that they bathed the baby in that pond and so on, which was not unusual or anything like that. And they stayed there for a time for everybody to kind of recover and from giving birth in such a manner as they did. So it's not explicitly known how long they stayed there, but it is said that Maya Devi passed away in 7 days after the birth. So complications from the birth, infection may have set in, any number of things we can, with our modern minds, we can theorize what it was and so on like that. And whether they immediately turned around and went back to the palace, the king's palace, or they started to make their way to the mother's village where they intended to go to have the baby, is not readily known. So, but in any case, we know that the mother passed away and that they did make their way back to the palace. So when they got to the palace, of course, the king was overjoyed that he had a son, because they had no way of knowing that at the time. And a son was a cherished child to have, to be an heir to the throne and so on. And of course, everyone was distraught that the mother passed away. So there was this mixed blessing of having this great birth, but at the same time losing the queen. So there were many attendants there, and there were family members there to take care of the infant, of the baby, and raise him and make sure that he got everything that he needed, that he was cared for in a way that anyone would want to be, but especially here now a prince. He was named Siddhartha Gautama. And as part of the custom that may have been, and we've heard this, in the Judeo-Christian, that wise men were summoned to come and do a divination to be able to predict who this child was to be. So the king had ordered this, and some wise men had come, and I think they said that there was 3 wise men. So whether that's coincidence to to the story of Christ being born, Jesus being born, but this happened several hundred years before the story of Jesus being born, but nevertheless. So these wise men did their divination, and they all came to the conclusion that this child was going to be a very special child, and declared to the king that he was either going to be a great leader of men by way of being a great warrior and a great king himself. And he was going to be able to embellish the kingdom by bringing in more people, more lands, and so on. He was going to be a great figure in the history of the kingdom and so on. But also they said that it wasn't clear that he might also be a great spiritual being who is going to lead many, many beings to a degree of happiness from their suffering that they had not experienced before. So the king, hearing this, he right away immediately said, well, he's not going to be a spiritual being. He is going to be raised to be a prince who is going to inherit the kingdom, and he is going to be a great leader of our people, and he is going to embellish the land that we have and the people that we have and so on. So this is the way he's going to be raised. And he did not want anything to be discussed with the child as he was growing up about any possibility of him being some kind of a spiritual being. So, and furthermore, he said that he did not want the child to leave the palace or the palace grounds. So you can imagine it's this beautiful, building 2,600 years ago, and there was this great courtyard that surrounded it, being very huge and had walls around it. There was usually the four walls, the east, west, north, south walls and so on, with gates at each one of the walls and so on. And the prince was not to be allowed to go outside of the courtyards, to go past the gates out into the villages or whatever beyond the walls of the palace. So that he forbade everybody from helping him to do that at the risk of their own life, that he would have their life taken from them if they violated this proclamation that he made. So in this atmosphere, the prince got everything that he needed. He was a prince. There was lots of wealth. There was lots of attendants to take care of him. So he was raised with all the teachings that could possibly given to him to read and to write, and especially as a warrior, especially as a military person and so on. And he was exposed to the political ways in which people worked with each other within the palace. Having to deal with the ministers and so on, and the people that would come in to see the king to get special privileges and so on like that. So the prince was raised being exposed to all of this. So he had many friends, young friends his age, that were attendants' children, or that were family children, cousins, and so on like that. So he had other people in his midst that were his age that he could play with, that he could go to school with, so to speak, that he could learn the martial arts, that he could learn how to be a warrior, and that also that they could play, and I imagine that they would role play being king and being queens and things like that, like children would do. So this continued all through his formative years. And then by the time he was about 12, 13 years old, there was a time then when children like him would be married, because the life expectancy of people at that time to be 35, 40 years old was a long time. So there was all kinds of things that could happen. There were wars, there was disease, all these kinds of things. But the prince didn't know about any of these things. For him, he just thought he's going to live in the palace forever and nothing is ever going to change, that one day he's going to be king. But, the point of someone getting sick and dying was not introduced to him. He knew nothing about somebody being severely injured and dying from the injuries. He didn't know anything about disease or anything like that because he was protected from that by the edict that the king had said, that there's not to be any discussion with this prince about any kind of bad things that could befall him. Everything was to be perfect. So now he's 12, 13 years old. It's time for him to get married and to start to raise a family, to bring, an heir, his heir, to the royal family and so on. So they had a great big festival, and the word went out to the other villages and the other kingdoms, throughout the land and so on, that they were looking for, Prince Siddhartha Gautama was looking for a bride, and they would, they wanted to have all the available princesses or noble ladies, noble young girls, to come to meet Prince Siddhartha to so he could select someone that was suitable. So these festivals would go on for days, day and night, day and night, day and night, and he's meeting all these available princesses and noble ladies and so on, but nothing was coming together. He wasn't finding anybody that he found suitable. So, but it was in the last day that they declared was going to be the end, that this faraway king came with his daughter. Well, we don't know that he was a king, but this nobleman came with his daughter, a young daughter about the same age as Prince Siddhartha, and immediately they met and realized that this was something that they could enjoy. They could enjoy their lives together. They immediately bonded and so on, and this was wonderful. So there was great celebration and jubilation and so on, and that the Prince Siddhartha had found somebody that he could love and would love him and respect and so on, and have children and everything. Her name was Vajradhara. Vajradhara. No, it wasn't Vajradhara. Excuse me. It was
Vajradhara.
what was it?
Yashodhara.
Yes, that's it.
Yashodhara.
Say it again.
Yashodhara.
Yashodhara. Yes.
Yashodhara, right.
Yashodhara. Yeah, I'd forgotten there for a moment there. So anyway, so they planned that there was going to be this great wedding, this great marriage that was going to happen and so on. So all the villagers, all the people from around all the different kingdoms and so on prepared for this, and there was this great celebration, and they got married. So this is their 13 years old or so. So things went on, life went on, and now Siddhartha is a young boy. He's a teenager, and he has his attendants, and everything. All his needs are being cared for in every way that you can imagine. The attendants would make sure that he had the right food, that he had the right clothing for the right times, for the right celebrations and so on, and that they would take care of him, that he would have attendants that would bathe with him and so on. So he had a lot of pleasures that were being bestowed upon him by being the prince. And he also was continuing his training as a warrior, and he was becoming more and more artful and skillful in the way in which he was able to overcome his friends, the attendants' children's, and his cousins, and so on, that he could subdue them very well. And sometimes there was pain involved. He didn't want to hurt anybody, or nobody wanted to hurt anybody. But if there was something that was serious, we didn't see them anymore, because there was not to be any suffering within the palace gates and so on. So, but he continued to be invited into the discussions that the king and the ministers were having and so on. So he was politically being trained about how to deal with the subjects of the king and all that. So this is going on through all his teenage years, and he's getting better and better and better at this and everything. But Yashodhara was not having any children. She was not becoming pregnant. So there was concern about this, but not alarm about this, so as Prince Siddhartha was now getting to be a little bit older, he's probably in his 19, 20 years old, 21 years old, something in that range, something like that. And he's getting more and more curious about what is on the other side of the walls. What is outside that he's been forbidden to go out to explore, to be able to experience those things. And more and more, he wants to go and understand what this is. So his father wouldn't let him go, and nobody would take him. So he went to his most faithful of his attendants and requested him very strongly that I want to go outside the gates and I want to see what's outside. And his attendant said, "Oh, no, Prince, no, I can't take you out, because if the king finds out I take you out, he's going to cut off my head for sure. Death is the penalty, and that's not going to be something I want to do. And you don't need to go out, please forget about this. It's not a good idea." So Prince Siddhartha continually, told him, "No, we're going to do this." He says, "What we'll do is we'll go out in the middle of the night while no one is awake, and you make arrangements with the gatekeepers that they open up the gate, and they don't have to know why you're opening up the gate, and we'll slip out, and then we'll come back before the sun rises, so that nobody will know that we were gone. But I get a chance to go out and see what's happening out beyond the gates." So finally, the attendant agreed to do this with Prince Siddhartha. So on this particular night, they make the arrangements and so on, and they go out on their horseback, and they have beautiful horses and with beautiful bridles and gem encrusted leather stirrups and all this kind of stuff, as you can imagine. And he's wearing all his beautiful silks and embroidery clothing and so on. And his attendant is equally, has beautiful clothing and so on. So here they go out through the gate, and they just get not too far out, and they're approaching what seems to be a village. And they're seeing these people that are laying in the streets, they're not really streets, it's just unpaved road, of course, dirt road and so on, who are just kind of writhing about and crying out and have twisted bodies and are looking very, very poorly, their skin is not looking good and so on. And they're all different ages, and some are crying and some are wailing in pain and so on. And Siddhartha says to his attendant, "Well, who are these people? What is this?" He said, "Well, these are people who have been forced out of the palace, who have become sick or have become injured in what other way, or maybe they were born imperfectly and have twisted limbs and so on. And they are there waiting for the scraps of food to come from the palace so that they could have first pick at the leftover food from the palace before it goes to the village and so on." So Siddhartha, I never imagined that this was possible. And he says, "Oh yes, this is what happens, and this is why people who get sick, people who get injured within the palace are immediately shown the gate and are told to leave, so that you won't see this suffering, and nobody will see this suffering inside the palace. The palace is to be pure and happy. Well, Siddhartha was just blown away by this, and he says, well, this is amazing. I never understood. I can't understand how this could possibly happen. Let's go back into the palace. So they make their way right away, go back into the palace, and nobody has missed them. And Siddhartha goes about his daily training as he's been doing and so on. But all the time he's thinking about this, what he had seen, never saw anything like it. So after some period of time, he gets up a little bit more courage, and he thinks to himself, well, I want to go further out into the village. I want to understand what is further out. Now, I understand this part about these people here and everything, and I feel bad for them, but I need to understand more. So again, he goes to his attendant, and he, tells him that we're going to go out. You're going to take me out in the same manner that we did before. And the attendant, tries to plead with him and says, oh, please don't make me go out with you. Please, I can't do this at the risk of my life. And Siddhartha says, don't worry, I'll take care of you. Nothing's going to happen. Nobody's going to know that we're going. So they do, and they make their way out, and they go through this first wave of people that are lying there, writhing about as he saw before. And now they go out into the village, and it's in the middle of the night, so there's nothing really happening until they get out to the far side of the village, out into some woods and so on. And he sees these people who are making their way around, who have their faces and their bodies all covered up with rags. And some of them are walking with canes, and some of them are all hunched over, and some of them are wailing and crying and so on. And they all appear to be very old. They all appear to be gray. They have gray hair or white hair, and they're speaking very, very meekly. They don't have a strong voice and so on. They seem very weak in their body. And Siddhartha has never seen anything like this, and says to his attendant, says, well, who are these people? He says, these seem to be, people who are grown up and so on. They're not children, but who are these? He says, well, these are the old people, and these are the sick people, and many of them have diseases like leprosy. And these people are forced out of not just the palace, but they're forced out of the village. And they have to live for themselves. They have to make for themselves out in this far part of the village with this great suffering. So, of course, Siddhartha is just amazed by this, never saw anything like this, couldn't imagine, the leprosy, couldn't imagine, getting old. He says, well, this could never happen to me. He says, oh, no. He says, this happens to all human beings. We get old. Our bodies begin to wear down. We get weaker. We need to walk with a cane. Our hair begins to turn colors and begins to fall out. And our eyesight gets weaker, and our voices get more feeble and so on. And yeah, this is what happens to human beings. We get sick, and then this is what happens to us. So Siddhartha says, oh, this can't happen to me. I'm a prince. He said, my father wouldn't let this happen to him. He says, well, I'm sorry, Prince, but you can see what happens. We are human beings, and this what's happens to us. So Siddhartha says, let's go back. I can't deal with this. So they turn their horses around, and they make their way back through the palace gate, and they go in, and nobody knows that they're gone. And Siddhartha now is thinking about this now for some period of time. And my goodness, this is really weighing on him very, very heavily, and he's just amazed by all this. So after another period of time, Now he gets up more courage and he wants to go further out past the village, all the way out past these sick people, because he could see in the distance that there were some kind of mountains or there's some kind of hills and there were some other things there that he wanted to experience. So once again, he requests his attendant to take him, and they go through the same routine. And he says, no, no, no. But he says, you must take me. And finally they go, and they go out past the people who were sick and so on, and gets all the way out there. And the sun starts coming up. And they can see in the foothills that are leading up to the mountains, they can see this procession of people that are like chanting, and some are wailing, like crying and so on. And this procession has people in the front, and then they got this, what appears to be a body, a human body that is all wrapped in white garments that is on a slab, that they're carrying this stretcher. And then there's this people behind that are making their way up. These people are making their way up these foothills up to the mountain there. And Siddhartha says, well, who are these people? What is this? He says, that is a funeral procession. And they are making their way up to the burial ground, or to the cremation, or to the sky burial, where the charnel ground, where they take the body and they burn the body, is what they normally would do, and so on like that. So he says, the body, what kind of body are you talking about? He says, well, that's a human being. He says, we saw the beings who would get injured. We saw the beings who would get sick. We saw the people who would born maimed. We saw the people that would get diseases and so on, and the people that would get old, and eventually they die. The life goes out of their body, and we need to dispose of the body through the cremation, or burial, or sky burial. But in that time, it would have been the cremation. So this is what they do. And he said, oh, well, this couldn't happen to me. He said, oh, no, of course this happens to you, and we can't leave the body. Once the life has gone out of the body, it begins to rot and smells very bad and is not very pleasant at all. So we need to dispose of the body. He says, oh my goodness, this is unbelievable. I can't imagine what this is, and this couldn't happen to me. Let's go back. So they start making their way back, but now the sun has come up, so they're going to have to make their way through the gate and so on. But as they're swinging around to come back to the village, they make their way they pass by a woods. And the woods is just the beginning part of a deep forest. But in the woods, they could hear men who are singing and chanting and playing different instruments, different drum instruments and some string instruments, and they're chanting and so on. And they get a little bit closer, and they can see in between the trees, they see these young men who have blue bodies and who are very jubilant, who are singing and dancing and so on like that. And Siddhartha says, well, who are these? What are these people? He says, these are the ascetics. He says, these are the people who have renounced their human lives. They've renounced their human possessions, their homes, their families, and they've taken up life in the forest to be with their teachers, to learn how to meditate and to liberate themselves as much as they would know how to do that. Maybe they didn't call it liberation at that time, but they would enter into prayers and so on. They were just giving everything up, and their body, would just kind of melt away until they would die, and they would achieve some kind of liberation at that point. So he said, well, how do they have the blue bodies? Where does that come from? He said, well, they burn fires and so on, and they actually go up to the burial grounds, and they'll take the ashes and they put them all over their bodies. And this is how they get their spiritual power from from doing this. So he says, wow, that's amazing. But meanwhile, he didn't interrupt these people, and they're very jubilant. They're very singing, they're very happy and dancing and so on. So this stuck in Siddhartha's mind. They make their way back into the palace. Nobody knows they're gone. And now he's there for some period of time, and Yashodhara gets pregnant. And now they're going through the period of time that she's going through her pregnancy, and he's continuing his training. Nobody knows that he's been outside the gates and everything. But he's realizing that, wow, my life is all planned out for me. And then one night, Yashodhara has the baby, and it's a baby boy. His name is Rahula. And she has this baby and everything. And Siddhartha is watching this, he's seeing this and realizing this is the rest of my life. I'm going to have to stay here the rest of my life. I'm going to have to do all these different things that I've been taught to do and so on. And there's so much out there, all that suffering, but then there was that jubilation of those ascetics. I need to know something about that. I have a yearning to know what that is. So he's thinking about this. The baby, had just been born, but it's getting a little bit older, but not too much, maybe just weeks old or something. And he convinces his attendant to once again to take him out. He wants to go to be with the ascetics. And this time the attendant says, oh no, he says, the king is going to know I took you out there. He's going to chop off my head no matter what. This is going to be terrible. You can't do this. Think of what the family's going to say. Think of what the kingdom's going to say. He tries everything he can to convince Siddhartha not to go, but Siddhartha is absolutely adamant that he wants to go. So they go out, they ride their gallant horses and everything, and they get to the edge of the woods, and Siddhartha gets off of his horse, and he says he writes a note to his father explaining that his attendant is not responsible for this, and he's giving the horse back to his father, and he's giving clothing and jewels to his wife and to his child, and he's giving gifts to his attendant and so on, for doing this for him, knowing that he may be shunned, he may not be able to go back to his old job, but they may not kill him. He's pleading with his father in his note not to kill his attendant and so on. But anyway, he's trying to square everything away, takes all his clothes off, and then finally he gets to the most precious thing that is a symbol of his royalty, the ponytail that all the royalty would have. And he takes his great sword or knife, whatever, and he pulls it and he whacks off his ponytail, and he gives it to his attendant and says, give this to my father. I'm not coming back. So the attendant is mortified. He's wailing, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. And Siddhartha makes his way by himself, naked, into the woods. The attendant takes the horses and goes back into the palace. So Siddhartha goes into the woods, and finally he meets up with a group of the ascetics, and they're all covered in ashes, looking blue and so on, dancing and singing and playing their instruments and everything. And he stops them and says, I would like to join you. He says, how does this work? How can I do this? He said, oh, it's very simple. Everybody is welcome. He says, we have a teacher who is in the forest, and the arrangement is that we are his servants, and he is our teacher. We go and collect food for him, and we bring it back to him every day, and then he gives us teachings every day. He teaches about, spirituality, however they might have called it at the time, and he teaches us how to meditate. So Siddhartha says, well, this is exactly what I'm looking for. What I'm trying to understand is how these people that I saw in the village who were suffering so very deeply, I want to understand how they can suffer like that and how some of us don't suffer like that. And what this all means and everything. He said, well, you have to ask the guru, you have to ask the teacher about this. So he says, okay. So he goes back. So they take him back to the guru, to the teacher, and he asks permission to be part of the group, and he agrees and says, this is the arrangement as the ascetics had said, and I'll teach you everything I know. So for some time, Siddhartha's part of the group, and he's doing that and so on. But the guru is never really teaching him what the cause of suffering is, what the suffering, why beings have suffering and different kinds of suffering, and how life comes and these mysteries of life. He's not really teaching them about that. He's teaching about how to like die, how to just be able to not, fully nourish the body, take care of the body until the body just exhausts itself, and then we lay down and die, and there is the liberation. So after some time, he says, well, I'm not getting what I want. And the guru says, well, there's other teacher that lives further into the forest. And perhaps if you go find him, maybe he'll have teachings that will benefit you more than what I can do, because I've taught you everything I know. So Siddhartha says, okay. So he makes his way deeper into the forest, leaving all his ascetic people that he had been with for that time. And he goes and walks on, and finally finds another group there who are going through the same process, and they have a guru, a teacher, who promises to teach him even more than the other teacher, because Siddhartha is explaining to him how he wants to know the cause of suffering and how I can, help other beings and so on, what all these mysteries are. So the guru says, I'll teach you everything I know. So after a period of time, he goes through that, and Siddhartha's not getting what he wants to know. He's not feeling, that yearning that he had for understanding this knowledge. He's not getting that. So he goes to the guru and says, I'm unsatisfied. I want better teachings. He said, well, there's another guru further into the forest, and perhaps if you go find him, maybe he'll have better teachings. So Siddhartha agrees and leaves again and goes further deeper into the forest and meets yet again this other guru and his sangha, his group. And he goes through the same thing. The guru agrees to give him teachings and so on like that. So after this period of time now, he's with this third guru. He's still not getting what he wants, but he's made some friends. He's got these fellows, and he says, they're teaching that the liberation comes from renunciation, the renunciation of taking care of the body and so on, until the body literally exhausts itself, and then you're liberated. That there's this something within you that is liberated, but it's still a mystery to me what all that is. He says, but I think that the meditation is the key to this, and I don't need to be part of this group with this particular or any other guru to be able to achieve this. I need to be on my own to be able to do this. So he's got these 5 friends that he's talking with, and they agree with him. They say, yeah, that makes sense. We've been here a long time, longer than you, and we haven't gotten any further along than we were when we came and so on. So we really want to find that liberation. So maybe we should go with you, Siddhartha, and find, do our solitary meditations until we are liberated, till we are free, till we find the truth. So they take off and they go into the mountains. They go out of the woods, they go into the mountains, and they're finding, some trees that are there. Maybe some of them stay underneath the trees, some of them go into some caves, some natural caves that are there, and so on. And they're there for 6 years. And for 6 years, they're eating just, a handful of rice a week. And then it becomes a handful of rice a month. And then it becomes 1 grain of sand, 1 grain of rice a day, and so on like that. They're trying to maintain their focus of their meditation, and not going out and collecting alms and so on. They're not looking for more food. It's just whatever they took with them, or whatever somebody might have brought to them or something. And they're drinking very small amounts of water or whatever they have to drink and to sustain themselves. And they are becoming skin and bones. After 6 years, they are just skin and bones, and very weak, and getting weaker and weaker and weaker. And there's images of what's called the starving Buddha, where you can see that the emaciation that they take on and so on in this condition and so on. And they are up in these caves. So after 6 years, Siddhartha says, I can't even think. I can't even meditate. Meditate's out of the question. I can barely stand up. I can barely sit up. And this is not working. And I feel, I sense that this type of death is not going to lead me to the truth. I don't know what it is, but this is not it. There's something yearning inside of me, that there's something more to this than what I've been practicing, that I've been led to practice in this way. So he thinks to himself, well, with whatever energy I have left, I'm going down to the village. So he starts making his way down through the mountain pathways and so on. And he passes by his 5 friends who say, Siddhartha, where are you going? He says, I'm going down to the village. I've had enough of this. It's not working for me. I can't think. I can't meditate. I just don't believe that this is the path that leads to the truth. I don't know what the truth is. I don't know how to get there, but I know that this isn't it. So they say, oh, Siddhartha, we're so close. Our bodies are giving up. We're going to have what we want. We're going to exhaust our bodies. He said, well, I'm sorry, I can't abide by that. I'm leaving. So they say, okay. They go into their caves, and he goes his way down into the valley. So he goes down into this mountain valley. And this is outside of a city or a township called Gaya in eastern India, northeastern India. And I've been there. I've been on this trip. And I've been to the cave where Siddhartha was, where he was practicing for 6 years. I've been there. And then I've been down, and he goes down into the valley. And the valley where he comes out is nothing but little rocks. It's all very flat and has all these little rocks. And they're river rocks. Because during the summertime, when they get the monsoons, all of a sudden, this riverbed becomes a raging river that lasts for a couple of months or whatever during the monsoon season. And then after the rain stop, the water dries up, and the riverbed just dries up and becomes, this flat rocks, these round rocks that are there. So he's crossing over this riverbed, and he meets a goat herder girl, a young girl who has goats with her, and also has some rice with her and so on. And she meets him. So whether he's walking or he's crawling, whatever, and recognizes him as being one of those great yogis that everybody in the village knew were up in the mountains, because they had a reputation. and knew of them, and said, "Oh, this is a miracle that this one has come down, and he needs to eat." So she offers him some of the goat's milk, some of the curds from the yogurt, and some of the rice that she has, and so on. And he takes it and begins to eat, and so on. So he's feeling better about that, and he makes his way, across the riverbed over to this other wooded area there, and he takes rest. Meanwhile, she goes back to the village and says, "Oh, you won't believe what I found. One of the yogis came down and I gave him some food. He's accepting food and everything." And the villagers, "Oh my God, this is such a miracle. This is wonderful." And they start going out to meet him and to take him food. And all around this riverbed are these shrines of the different families from the villages that made offerings to Siddhartha at this time to strengthen him. So over time, he's taking all this food, he's getting stronger and stronger. His mind is getting clearer. He's able to think better. He's able to stand. He's getting his physical body back and so on. And he's feeling very good about things. So these people are very jubilant that this is all happening and everything. So after this while that he's getting stronger, then he says, "Now it's time to get back to my meditation." He realizes and he declares that he cannot forsake the physical body. If he forsakes the physical body, the intellectual mind doesn't work so well. And if the intellectual mind isn't working well and the physical body isn't working well, he can't develop, he can't engage in his meditation and being able to open up his heart center, which he was learning about from the gurus. So he realizes that he has to honor his physical body. He has to honor his intellectual mind in order that he may realize what is in his spiritual heart. So he says, now I'm ready to go back into meditation. Now I have the strength. Now I have the understanding of the body, speech, and my mind. Well, he didn't say it that way, but the body, my intellect, and my heart center. So he finds a magnificent fig tree, a banyan tree, as some places are written, called a banyan tree, but it's a big, broad tree, and it's got broad limbs, branches with broad leaves on it. So it protects anybody who's sitting underneath of this, protects them from the harsh sunlight or protects them from the rain. It's a good place to be, to be able to practice meditation. So he makes himself a platform, out of some leaves or whatever, and kusha grass, and he says, "I'm going to sit here through the night, or whatever it takes, until I attain the truth, until I attain the enlightenment that I'm looking for." So he goes and he sits there, and he goes into his body position that he's been taught and everything, and he's having a most powerful, deep meditation than he's ever had before. And this is wonderful during the nighttime and everything, and he's losing scope of awareness of even what time it is, that it's at night and so on. But he goes into a meditation, and he's there, and then all of a sudden, right in front of him, arises this demon. And this demon is very powerful, has a great big voice, and very, very good looking and powerful, and says, "Oh, Siddhartha, why are you sitting here like this? Don't you know that you can be a great king? Don't you know that you can conquer lands and you can conquer people's minds, and they will follow you? They will come and be your subjects? All you have to do is get up off of this seat and follow me, and I will teach you everything you need to know. I will show you everything you need to know to be a great leader, to be a great king, to be able to manipulate people, to be able to control people so that they give you their taxes, they give you their possessions and so on, so that you can have a powerful, strong kingdom and so on. So Siddhartha looks at this demon and says, wow, he says, that's very persuasive, but you know what? I remember when I was back in the palace, I remember being with my father, and I remember being with the ministers, and I remember all the intrigue that they would use, the manipulation that they would use to be able to control all the different people and so on like that, and the words that they would use and the thoughts that they would use and everything. And it was not very natural. It was not something that I want to be part of. He says, no, I'm not interested in that. That's not the truth. I know what that is. You get behind me. And just like that, the demon disappears. And Siddhartha says, oh, I'm going back into my meditation. So he goes back into his meditation. And now he goes deeper than he was before into a samadhi, into a deep meditation. And everything is quiet. The mind is still and so on. And he hasn't been, it's deeper than he's ever been. And he's there for some time. And then all of a sudden, up arises a demon in front of him. And this powerful demon has lightning coming out of his eyes, has fire coming out of his fingers, has fire coming out of his throat, out of his mouth, and out of his nostrils, and so on, and powerful. And he says, "Oh, Siddhartha, why are you sitting here? Why are you doing this? You could be back in the palace. You could be conquering all these lands. You could be conquering all these people. You could lay waste to all these people. All you need to do is to follow me. I will show you all this power. You will have all this power to conquer all this land and people. And your kingdom will be the most powerful kingdom that ever was. All you need to do is follow me." So Siddhartha listens to him and thinks about that. And he says, you know, when I was back in the palace and I was a teenager learning all the martial arts, learning how to be a warrior, and I remember all the pain that was inflicted. And then I remember going out into the village and seeing the people whose injuries were as a result of war and the battles that they had to wage and everything. He says, I'm not looking for that. That doesn't do anything to overcome. That's not the truth of suffering. No, I'm not interested in that. You get behind me. And just like that, that demon disappears. And Siddhartha goes back into his meditation. So now he's in that meditation, deeper samadhi than ever before again. And this time, another demon arises. And this demon is in the form of 4 dancing girls. Beautiful, voluptuous, intoxicatingly gorgeous, full of passion and lust, and say to Siddhartha, oh, why are you sitting here like this? You could be with us, enjoying all the pleasures that we can bring you. Oh my goodness, why are you wasting your time like this? Wouldn't you rather be in all this enjoyment? This would be so wonderful. We would enjoy you. You would enjoy us. This would be magnificent. Please come with us. Get up off your seat. Come with us. We can go to the palace or anywhere you want, and we can have these pleasures all the time. So Siddhartha says, oh my goodness. He says, you know, I remember when I was back in the palace. And I remember I had all these attendants, and I had a different attendant anytime I wanted, day or night. I had all my pleasures were being were being satisfied. I remember that. And I remember all the jealousy that was going on. Oh no, I want to be the one with Siddhartha. Oh no, I want to be the one with Siddhartha. And the jealousies that were going back and forth between all these attendants and so on, the jealousies and the envies and the greediness and all of this was all apparent. I was seeing that when I was in the palace. He says, and that's not the truth I'm looking for. That's not what I need. That's not the liberation from suffering. No. He says, no, you get behind me. I'm not looking for that. And bam, they disappear. And then now he's free to go into the deepest samadhi that ever could be imagined. And he's in this samadhi, and everything just like opens up to him. And he sees all the lifetimes of all people. He sees all the causes of all the suffering of all people. He sees all the happiness and all the causes of happiness of all the people. He sees all the different life forms. He sees the insects. He sees the animals. He sees the human beings. He sees the stars. He sees all the universe. He sees everything in complete clarity, complete understanding, complete recognition. And he realizes that he has attained a liberation. He has attained an enlightenment of understanding all these things. He sees the responsibility of what it is to have all of this. So he remains in this mindfulness of this unexplainable experience. Unexplainable. All he can do is just be there with it. He doesn't know what it's just experiencing it. So the sun starts coming up. He's opening his eyes. And this mind is still with him. This awareness is still with him. And he's walking about, and the awareness is still with him. And he just doesn't know what to say or do, but, we call it a bliss. We call it this blissfulness and so on. And he's like this for some time. And the villagers are coming, and he's seeing the villagers, and they're recognizing him with this new look. He's got this aura about him. And he starts pacing up and down. And there's this pathway in Gaya, Bodh Gaya, it's called Bodh Gaya, because it becomes the enlightenment of Gaya, this little suburban village, if you will, outside the village of Gaya now becomes Bodh Gaya, because this is where the enlightenment tree is, where Siddhartha was. And he's pacing up and down for 2 weeks. And every time he steps down, flowers come up. And his 5 friends from the hills, from the mountain, come down and see him. And they say, "Oh, Siddhartha, what has happened to you?" And they recognize his golden body. They see this and say, "Oh, you have transformed. You must be the Buddha." And he doesn't say anything. There's nothing he can say except that he recognizes that he has achieved an enlightenment that has never been achieved before, that he has that gift that has never been given before. So he says, he's telling his friends that they should eat, inviting them to eat. And they're saying, "Well, teach us, teach us, teach us." He's saying, "Well, eat, eat, eat," and so he's pacing up and down, and they're eating and so on. And he's not speaking. So there's this place there, and you can see this pathway where he paces up and down and so on. And so after 2 weeks, he says, he's thinking to himself, "Well, I got to leave here. I don't know where to go." They're beseeching him, asking him to teach. He doesn't know what to teach. He doesn't know what to say. So he says, well, I'm just going to go to Varanasi, because Varanasi was west of Gaya, and Varanasi is the holiest place in India. This is where all the Indian Hindus want to go and die, or if they die somewhere else, at least to have their bodies taken to Varanasi to be cremated on the banks of the Ganges River. The Ganges River is the mother Ganges. This is the mother river. Without the mother river, without the mother Ganges, there would be no life in India, because it brings the water, etc., and everything that is needed to sustain life. So this was the holiest place in all of India. So he said, oh, this must be where I got to go. So he goes into Varanasi, he walks to Varanasi, and he just walks straight through, because as he's going through there, he's realizing that I don't need to be here. This is where I've got this power, I've got this awareness, I've got this bliss, but it's not resonating, with what's here. There's so much suffering here. And he continues to walk through Varanasi till he gets out to the western extreme, the western suburb of Varanasi, to a place called Sarnath. And in Sarnath is this deer park. So it's this great big meadow, and there's a woods around, and there's deer around. And they got sal trees, they got lots of different trees, but they got these sal trees in this meadow, and the deer, graze on the grass that's in this meadow, and so on like that. And it's taken him 49 days, 7 weeks from the time he attained his enlightenment to get to this point, to get 49 days to get to Sarnath. All the time, his 5 friends are following and beseeching him to teach, and he's not saying anything. And finally he gets to this, and he sits underneath of a sal tree, and he tells his 5 friends, you come and you sit in front of me, and I'm going to give you the first teaching of the Dharma. So they sit in a semicircle, and that's what begins to happen. Let's take a short break. If you need to stand up, take a drink of water or something like that, we'll come back and we'll continue the story. If anybody has a question about anything so far, we can answer a question or two.
In one of the stories, I heard that Buddha would see his parents, and he had like illusion that either his parents are sick, or the house is burning, the palace is burning, and he has to come and help rescue them. So I think it's kind of also attachment to his own parents that he had to overcome in this meditation. I don't know if you have any details heard about this, or maybe that was later parts of his insights, or I mean, what do you hear about that?
Well, I haven't heard that specifically that I recall, but as you point out, there's going to be many stories, and these weren't written down immediately, and these are legends and so on like that. But they also have been, the experience has been shared by many people, because there have been many Buddhas, many masters who have had experience like this, and can and so this is what I would consider to be an empirical, a very basic, very fundamental life story of the Buddha, without too much, legendary things associated with them, so that we can appreciate, how the Dharma developed and so on, and what the basic elements of the Buddha, being a human being is all about. So there's many books written, and everybody is certainly welcome to read all the different translations and books. So
Hmm.
in the time period that we have, and with my limited ability to be able to tell all these stories, I'm trying to keep it as concise and as simple as possible.
Yes, I understand. I mean, of course, like when you read stories, one story would have something that the other story doesn't have, and the other way around. And I had another question. When the like Buddha's mother had vision, right, of elephant with 6 tusks. Do you see any significant, like what those tusks would represent? I mean, I understand the elephant, big white elephant, pure, big, somebody is supposed very important. But why would there be 6 tusks or something like that?
Well, again, I'm not I'm not a scholar to be able to comment on that, but you got to understand that this tradition came out of the prevalent Hindu tradition of the time, and so whether or not that was the 6 human realms, if that was expressed as a representation of that, I don't know. I'd be guessing, and I would certainly
Could it
defer
be maybe?
to others who have done studies in this to be able to comment on that.
Yeah, I was just wondering if you heard anything.
No.
Just in my mind, it, I thought, oh, could that be maybe like 6 perfections, 6 parameters?
Maybe so. That's a good point. Maybe so.
All right.
All
No,
right.
thank
Well,
you.
thank you for the
I'm
questions, and sorry I don't have better answers for them, but
anyhow, your storytelling is really wonderful. Thank you.
well, thank you. All right. Well, then I hope everybody's with us. I'm going to continue now. So, are we recording? Yes, we're recording. So Siddhartha now is seated on the in the pasture in this meadow, and has his 5 friends in front of him, and he says, "Now I'm going to give you a teaching," because what the Buddha had realized, or Siddhartha had realized during these 49 days, was that his experience was something that cannot be transferred. It cannot be explained. It is beyond our human capability, even for the Buddha, even for someone who has had the experience, to be able to tell them what the experience is. But what we can do, what each of us has to do, is to experience it for ourselves. So what Siddhartha realized, that the only thing that he could teach that would be valid would be how he got to that point of realization. So this is what he did. So as he was going into the meditation and so on, and as he was receiving all the teachings from before as an ascetic and so on, was all being processed. And finally, when he was sitting underneath the Bodhi tree, the enlightenment tree, when the 3 demons came up, he was able to dismiss each one of those demons. The first one being representative, being symbolic of the ignorance, of delusion, of the delusion that we can be, the sovereign over all beings, that we can control all beings, and that we should control all beings, that we have the power to do all that, but that only leads to more suffering. So he realized that by remembering what it was when he was in the palace. So he was able to overcome that delusion of that being a royal being as being a great thing, and being what leads to enlightenment. So he dismissed that. Then the second one was the great warrior and the hatred and the aggression. And we know the power that comes unleashed from that causes nothing but pain and harm and death and injury and so on to all others. And he knew that that wasn't the path to enlightenment. And he was able to dismiss that. And that went away. And then finally was the pleasures of the body, the pleasures of the flesh, the desire, the lust, the passion. And he knew that that only leads to more and more suffering. So all these things that people are led around, by the proverbial ring in the nose, those who have manipulative powers of speech, who become great leaders, that delusion just leads to great suffering. And those who have great power to wage war and so on only leads to great suffering. And those who are led around and controlled by their passions, by the desire for flesh and so on, that only leads to suffering. So those are the three root poisons that we talk about. And then out of them, comes the jealousy and the greed as well. So we talk about 5 poisons, but the 3 basic poisons were demonstrated, were illustrated in that part of the story of the Buddha recognizing those things. And this, of course, is a metaphor for our own experience. This is showing us that we need to overcome our delusions. We need to overcome our hatred. We need to overcome our desires, as well as the jealousy and the greed. And then how we do that is through the cessation, recognizing the causes of these things, and then cutting through those causes, stopping those causes. So this becomes what the first teaching of the first turning of the wheel of Dharma is all about. He says, I can't give you enlightenment. I can't tell you what enlightenment is, but I can tell you how I got there. It's up to you to do this. So he said that the first truth, because all this was searching for the truth. So the first truth is that all life has suffering in it. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter whether you're young or old, rich or poor, man or woman, whatever, an animal, an insect. All life has suffering in it. And that suffering has many different forms, through the birth, death, old age, and sickness. And then the other forms of human suffering, not getting what you want, getting what you want, but having to take care of it, not being with the ones you want to be with, and then being with those that you don't like. So we've talked about all those at one time or another, and we're going to continue talking about them in this next round of 101, Buddha Study 101, that we're going to engage in. So this is the first of those teachings. So we're going to start over again with the Jewel Ornament of Liberation. So the first teaching is the teaching of the truth of suffering, that all life has suffering in it. The second is that we create this suffering. We make this suffering ourselves through our desire, our attachment to having a physical body, to being born in this body, to being born in this lifetime, to being born with all these things around us and so on. That we create all this ourselves. We create the situation. We create the conditions for ourselves, or at the very least, we are subject to the conditions of what we have created this life to do these things. So to recognize that and to take responsibility for these things, to recognize that we are creating this ourselves. So we start off by saying, okay, I have this attachment to this life. I have this attachment to this body. I desire this life. I wanted to be born, but then you can also say, I have this desire for power, for pridefulness. I have this desire for hatred. I have this desire for greediness. I have this desire for jealousy and so on, to have what others have. So we create this ourselves through our attachments and our aversions. The aversions are the hatred. So we create the hatreds. We create the aversions. So we are responsible for that. So the third truth is that the way to avoid this, to not have this suffering, is to cut through the causes, the cessation of the causes. So it's literally cutting through the roots of the causes of the suffering. So we've talked about this before, and we're going to talk about it again, that when we talk about the 5 poisons, that each of the 5 poisons has a cause of those 5 poisons. So there's a cause for the delusion, the ignorance, there's a cause for the desire, there's a cause for the hatred, there's a cause for the jealousy, and a cause for the greediness and pridefulness and so on. And for us to be able to recognize those causes, and before they are allowed to hold on, that we're able to cut through them and release ourselves, to liberate ourselves from the karma, from the action that we take from those causes. And thereby, there's no result. The result is no karma. There's no action after that. So we need to be able to understand those causes and then to apply the antidotes for those causes before the action, before the karma precipitates. So the jealousy has the ignorance has the education as the antidote. The hatred has the loving kindness that is the antidote. The desire has the meditative objectiveness to be able to recognize the cause of the desire. The jealousy is the generosity, or rather, is the accomplishment, that we can accomplish whatever we need to accomplish, and that the greediness is the antidote, is the generosity, that we shouldn't hold on to things. We need to be generous with the things that we do have. So it's applying these things. So this was the first teaching, the first turning of the wheel of Dharma. So the Dharma is a pathway. So there's many different pathways, but the Buddha Dharma, the Dharma with a capital D, is the pathway of liberation, is the pathway of the Buddha, of understanding the truth of that which binds us to the suffering. So this Dharma is the speech of the Buddha. This is what he could speak. This is what he could say, was how to recognize the situation that we are in, the samsara, the causes of the samsara, and the way that we can overcome that. This is what he was teaching. So this is the cessation of the suffering. But how do we do that? We do that through the 4th Noble Truth, and the 4th Noble Truth is the Eightfold Path. So the Eightfold Path is we do it by having the right view. The right view is that all beings want to be free, and that we have the ability to be free, to take responsibility for that freedom. On the other side of that is to take the responsibility for the entrapment that we allow ourselves to succumb to. So if we can see that we want to be free and that we have to let go of all those entrapments through these different antidotes to these causes of the actions of karma, then there we have freedom in our ability. Then we have the right resolve. The right resolve is that I'm going to do this, and that I'm going to protect myself with the Dharma, that I'm going to be on the path, that it is a pathway, and I'm going to remain on the pathway. I'm going to bring it up. I'm going to stabilize it. I'm going to do everything I can to manifest the Buddha Dharma and live the Buddha Dharma. And that becomes my protection, the right resolve to continue to do that. And the next one is the right speech, that if we always tell the truth, even when we don't know the truth, to say we don't know the truth, because the easiest thing that we get caught up in are our lies. Our speech is an action. And if our speech becomes the lies that we are telling to create this self-aggrandizement, this arrogance, to feed this arrogance that we have and so on, that leads to our entrapment, that leads to our suffering and so on. So if we always speak the truth, then we're not creating that web of lies that we can get caught up in. So right speech. The next one is right conduct. That if we are always behaving with purity, that we're always doing good deeds, that we recognize virtue, and that we cut ourselves off from non-virtue, if we're able to recognize that, and we're able to lead our lives connected in a proper way with the proper conduct of virtue and so on, with wholesomeness and so on, to be able to identify that and to maintain that, then that is maintaining the Buddha Dharma, the right conduct. Then the next one after that is right livelihood. So right livelihood is being connected with our conduct, that we are interconnected with all other beings and with the rest of nature. And that if we have the right livelihood of supporting each other without doing any harm and so on, then there's no non-virtue. We eliminate non-virtue by not doing any unwholesomeness, by taking care of each other, doing something that we are sharing together and not trying to take advantage of each other and so on like that. We're supporting each other. So that's right livelihood. Then the one after that is right effort, that we're always moving forward, that we have victory in our minds, victory in our hearts, victory in our actions, the victory of virtue, the victory of peace, the victory of helping others. So if we maintain that victory, if we maintain the right effort all the time, then we won't slip. We will be able to accomplish the cessation of the suffering. And then the next one is the seventh one, is right mindfulness, to be aware of what it is that we're doing and to be responsible for what it is that we're doing. And if we find ourselves making a mistake, we stop, we correct it, and we carry on in the right manner, rather than continuing a lie. Once we tell a lie, if we continue to tell the lie, then we're just creating this web for ourselves. But if we have the right mindfulness of who we are, what we're doing, and so on, and for the spiritual mindfulness and the intellectual mindfulness of what we are doing, we're building this body of knowledge, of understanding what it is to be a human being. And then the eighth of the Eightfold Path is the right concentration, or the right absorption, that all this is within ourselves as being a human being, and this is to be a complete human being, and that we can carry this with us, and that we can be an enlightened being in this body, in this lifetime. We can do that. It's possible. We have much work to do, but it's through the cessation, it's through all the other aspects of the Eightfold Path that we're able to do that. And then to be able to sustain that is the absorption, is to become the embodiment of that purity. So that's the Eightfold Path, and that is the four Noble Truths. So it sounds very simple. It is the basis of all the Buddha teachings. And this is why it's the first teaching of the wheel of Dharma, of what it is to become a Buddha. Now, this is a pathway. The Dharma is a pathway, and there's many other pathways. So for us, we may say, because we've been introduced to this, and say, wow, this is really great. You know, it's so well articulated, it's easy for me to follow and so on. This must be true for everybody. But the Buddha would be the first one to tell you that this is the way that he was able to develop for himself, that he was able to recognize himself. But there are other traditions, there are other pathways. Now, the other pathways, in the essence, may have the same qualities of the purity, but for us that are involved in the Buddhism, see the articulation of what all this is, what all the choices are. And this is the gift of the Buddhism. This is the gift of the Buddha, to be able to give us the Buddha Dharma. This is his pathway that is so well articulated. There is a Christian pathway. There is a Hebrew pathway. There is a Hindu pathway. There is a Taoist pathway. There is an Islamic pathway, many other pathways. And at the core of them all, they are all the same. You know, some people might argue that for many of those traditions, but for it to be true, I mean, for us to recognize the truth of that is to recognize the equanimity, is to recognize the four thoughts that turn the mind, but especially the four vast immeasurable qualities of bodhicitta, and that bodhicitta is not exclusively a Buddhist thing. That the Christ has bodhicitta, the Hebrews have bodhicitta, all the different traditions have bodhicitta. They have different names for it. Just like they have different names for what we call Buddha, they may call God, they may call Yahweh, they may call Brahma, they may have different names. But but the essence of it is the same. This is the human being experience. So, at this point, or somewhere about, the five friends then recognize that Buddha, or that Siddhartha is the Buddha, is indeed the Buddha, to be able to articulate this for noble truths, because this hadn't been articulated before. So they recognized him as the Buddha, and they began to refer to him as the Buddha. As time went on, I don't know exactly when, but at some point he then became Buddha Shakyamuni. He was referred to as Buddha Shakyamuni because it became recognized that there had been many Buddhas, and there were many Buddhas to come. And that so the Buddhas, these different Buddhas, all had different names, and his gift, this Buddha Shakyamuni, his gift was the gift of teaching us how to cut through the causes that lead to the suffering. Prior Buddhas had been teaching that there's suffering and so on, but they didn't give the teachings of the cessation. Buddha Shakyamuni gave the teachings of the cessation. So Shakyamuni, Shakya was like the family name, was the kingdom name of his father's kingdom name. So he's known as the Shakya family, the Shakya clan. And Muni is Sanskrit for the word sage. So sage of the Shakyas. So they were paying respect for Siddhartha Gautama, who came from the Shakya family, and saying, here's the sage of the family, here's the great sage. So the great wise men who came and did the divinations said that he was going to be either a great leader of men as a king, or he's going to be as a spiritual leader. And obviously it became the spiritual leader that he had this yearning for. He wasn't satisfied when he was a young man back in the time of of being with Yashodhara in the palace and so on, he wasn't satisfied with that. He had this yearning. And maybe all of us, in one degree or another, have that kind of yearning. Because of all of us, we've had some level of comfort in our lives. You know, we've had this gift, you know, of being born where we've been born as a healthy human being, and being educated. We've had many gifts, but we've not been satisfied with them. We say there's something else. And it's gotten us to this point of the Buddha Dharma. So we can see that we are as the Buddha, that our story is the same as the Buddha, or can be the same as the Buddha. And that's what he was pointing out. And that's what the great teachers point out. I can't tell you what enlightenment is, but I can tell you how I got it. And it's up to you to use what I tell you in your own way to be able to find it for yourself. And there's no exclusivity to this. That was the point about the different traditions, the Christian tradition and the Hebrew tradition and so on like that, that there's no exclusivity to this. And the Buddha would teach us, would say this in the sutras. So the Buddha then, he was 35 years old or so when this first teaching of the first turning of the wheel of Dharma came about. He was about 35 years old, it said. So for the next almost 50 years, he traveled all around northern India, which would be Nepal, but also northern India as well, and going village to village, and accumulating, you know, a great following of students. And he would teach them the three baskets. The three baskets of teaching is, the first basket was the basket of discipline, was the foundation of whatever you're doing, whatever misdeeds that you're doing, you got to stop doing them. And the reason why we're doing these things is out of our ego, out of our thinking that we can get away with these things, all of these things. So he said, one important thing, or a group of important things that you got to do, is you've got to recognize yourself as being a holy person, as being a person who is on the path. And to do that, you cut your hair, shave your hair, because we have so much ego attached to our physical body, to our appearance. So shave your hair. And that's going to make a huge difference in the way you view yourself and the way others view you. And if everybody's got shaved heads, there's a whole element of our ego that is taken away. And then the next thing is, take off your clothes and put on these robes, these very simple robes. And this is another level of ego, because we have pride about our clothing. Our clothing becomes symbolic of who we are, what our personality is, and so on. But if everybody looks the same, everybody dresses the same, then there's another layer of the ego that has been removed. And so you become even more simple about things. And then you also begin to follow this daily routine, where you get up at, sunrise or just before sunrise, and you begin to, you recite certain prayers and so on that are remembrances to yourself of what it is that you're doing. And then you go out and you collect alms, you go out and beg for food. And in generosity for the food that you get, you give teachings to people. That was the exchange. That they would go knock on doors. The Buddha would go knock on doors and say, oh, will you give me some food? And I will give you some teachings. So to include that into your practice, so that this is all part of the discipline to do these things, and then to have a code of the way in which we live and not doing negative things and attending the teachings, the Buddha teachings, and the Buddha was giving the sutra teachings, which were, him giving this guidance about things, and he would go into these meditation experiences, and he would be able to teach while in these meditative states, these pure states, and teach his students how to do this, and they would do this. And he had many followers who became Buddhas like he did, and they would go around the countryside. They would leave and they would go around the countryside and they would give teachings. And it continued on and on and on. And the Buddha taught that during his time of his Buddha Dharma being taught, there would be 10,000 Buddhas. So whether that's a symbolic number, whether it was 1,000 Buddhas or it was 10 Buddhas or it was 1,000,000 Buddhas or 10 million Buddhas, whatever, what it demonstrates is that there would be a multitude of realized beings. It just wasn't one. It just wasn't him. There was going to be many. And there was many that came before, there would be many that would come afterwards, and so on. So that's all part of the first teaching of discipline. There's more to it. I'm simplifying it for this conversation, and we will investigate that. We talked about that, the fundamental teaching. Then the next one was the teaching of the emptiness of all things, that all things are empty of their own nature, and that the hero of this emptiness is the Bodhisattva, that we are not here for exclusively ourselves, we are part of something, and that whatever gifts we have, we need to be able to share with other beings, and to have this devotion to be able to do that. So we're sharing our knowledge of the emptiness, the knowledge of the code of living, the knowledge of the bodhisattva, of the way in which we work with each other. It's part of the actualization of the Eightfold Path. So this devotion that we are teaching, and then the next one is the teaching of the wisdom of what all this is, what it is to be a Buddha. How does a Buddha behave? What is a Buddha thinking about? What are the elements of a Buddha that we can aspire to and cultivate and recognize and be able to eliminate those things that are pulling us back from being a Buddha? So it's the wisdom. So one was the discipline, next one was the devotion, and then the next one is the wisdom, the mind of the Buddha. So those he was teaching those all the time, and there were beings who were only hearing the discipline. There were other beings who would hear the devotion part. There were other beings that would hear the wisdom part. But in the teachings he would give, all three were being expressed in his teachings. But some people would just hear one thing or the other. So again, this is all part of being a human being and setting forth this pathway of the Buddha Dharma. So he traveled around, and during this time, it said that he met many, many, many people. Many, many people would talk to him. And it said that there would be 84,000 emotions. And the emotions, remember, the 5 basic poisons are the least common denominator for all those 84,000 emotions. So this person has this combination, and this person over here has this combination, and this person has this combination. But nevertheless, he would listen to this and he would give teaching to everyone that he could to help them to overcome their emotions. So therefore, this 84,000 emotions come. And then there's groups of these emotions that if you study you want to study that degree of things, there's lots of books and so on that you can read about that. But I'm speaking very generally here. And so he continued this, traveling around. His family, we'll just take a few more minutes. His family, his father came to see him, and he went to see his father at the palace. But of course, Buddha Shakyamuni remained the Buddha. His son, Rahula, came and became a monk along with many others. His wife, Yashodhara, became one of his nuns. That he had nunneries. That it was later on through the culture, that the feminine was kind of suppressed. But during the time of the Buddha, the feminine was equal to the masculine, and that there was monastery for the men and there was nunnery for the women, and all were welcomed equally. But through the culture being as it is, and the delusion of human beings and so on, they perverted the separation of men and women and created the prejudices and so on that would come out. So he continued teaching like this, and then when he was about 80, depending on what book you read, 80, 81, 82, 83, 84, he was in Kusinagar in northern India, and he ate some bad food, and he realized that he did not have the strength to overcome the bad food. So whether he was intentionally poisoned or it was rotten food, and he was food poisoning, innocent food poisoning. Many people had tried to kill him during the time of his teachings. All things weren't perfect. Everybody, there were many people tried to kill him. His own cousin was trying to kill him, and he was jealous of him, and his cousin was a follower of his, and so on. So there was lots of intrigue. There was lots of stuff going on in the life of the Buddha. The fact that he was a Buddha didn't mean that there wasn't suffering that he was subjected to. The point was, he wasn't attached to the suffering. He didn't have aversion to the suffering. He saw the suffering, but he had no attachment, no aversion to it. And this is the point for us all. So he had this poison food that he ate, and he knew he was going to pass. And so he gathered his disciples at the time together. He had many, many thousands of disciples. It's said that during this time, maybe there was 500 disciples that were with him, or maybe it was 5,000, again, depending on what you read. Let me see. I'm looking for there's a particular quote of the Buddha. I'm sorry. Here it is. So this is, he's on his deathbed, if you will, and he adopts the position of what's called the reclining Buddha. And in this position, he's lying on the right side, on his right side. And he's got his right hand underneath his right ear like this, and his elbow is on the ground, and he's horizontal. He's horizontal, lying on his right side. So there's statues and so on that are called the reclining Buddha. And so he's in this position. And so he teaches, this is his last teaching to his students who are there in front of him, who are beseeching him not to pass. And he says, "Behold, O disciples, now I exhort you, all compounded and conditioned things have their nature of constant flux, constant change, and they are all subject to change. Strive on ardently with mindfulness to complete your tasks. So this was his admonition. This was his last words, that you've got all the teachings. You've been with me for quite some time. There are masters here who have memorized my teachings and are traveling about, and you can be with them. You've got everything you need. Now it's up to you. You've got to bring this into yourself, and you have to allow yourself to go through the changes that allow for your liberation. So that's where we are today. So his teachings continued on. It was all oral teachings at the time. It wasn't written down. It was all Sanskrit language. There was no alphabet. There was no written alphabet. It wasn't for another couple of hundred years. They had these councils where the monastics would come together and they would discuss and the teachings, the sutras and everything, and they would commit to writing in the Pali language. And then that became a source language. And again, I'm not a scholar on this, but then that began to travel, and the Buddhism started traveling over to China from India, and started traveling up through the Stanic nations, up through Siberia and into Mongolia and Southeast Asia, going down to Southeast Asia and so on. So this continued and so on. He died in Kusinagar, and he was buried, he was cremated, and his ashes, his relics were cremated in this place. And I've been to all these places, not all of them, but I've been to the 4 holiest sites of the Buddha, because there's pilgrimage that you can take. And if you have the wherewithal to be able to join a pilgrimage to go to India to these holy sites, do it. It is life-changing for many different reasons, and I'll be glad to talk to you more and more about it. I've got a DVD of my trip, of all the still pictures I took and so on, and I'll be glad to tell you about it. And you can see things on YouTube and so on, but it's a magnificent thing to do. It's life-changing. So we've out of time. Thank you for staying with me late like this, but I hope this was helpful. If anybody has any questions, I'll be glad to stay online for a time and answer what I can, and we can continue Q&A next week when we continue our Buddhist Study 101. Does anybody have any questions or thoughts you'd like to talk about?
Lance, thank you so much. I always love listening to this first lesson when you restart the cycle. Thank you.
You're welcome, Zara. Thank you.
Lance, I think this is terrific. And I really appreciate your time and your effort, and not the least, your knowledge and the way you give us these lessons. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. But everything I've got came from other people, believe me. And it's really the Buddha teaching that we're all yearning for. So that's the real thing. So thank you very much for saying those things. All right. By the virtues collected in the 3 times, by myself and all beings in samsara and nirvana, and by the innate word of virtue, may I and all sentient beings quickly attain unsurpassed, perfect, complete, and precious enlightenment. May the teachings of the great Trikumpa Ratnashri, who is omniscient, Lord of the Dharma, master of interdependence, continue and increase through study, practice, contemplation, and meditation until the end of samsara. Om, Ah, Om. Om, Ah, Om. Om, Ah, Om. May my body, speech, and mind become inseparable with the body, speech, and mind of all the enlightened ones for the benefit of all sentient beings. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Lance. That was beautiful.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
I know Bernie would have had many good things to add to this, and next time we can talk about
That would
it.
be another hour or so, if I would give my version of the story. So